will be useful for that particular function. So let's start by creating the resource. So let me show you how to create the resource. So we're going to run this command, php @make resource, and then we are going to call it author resource. Okay, so you can see the author resource has been created, and now it is stored on a new directory called the resources, and inside it you can see there is this directory called this file called the author resource, and inside that you have one method which is called the toArray, and from this method is where you are going to transform your data. So this request will be carrying all the data that has been let's say returned here, and then when you apply that resource, it will just transform that data and give you the intended way of presentation. So here I'm going to remove this one because I don't want to return just a normal array. So I'm going to do the following. So here I just want to return the name, and it will be coming from the request. Then I'll say name, and I want to return the bio. Then I'll say request, then the bio. The last one will be the nationality, and here I'm going to return the nationality. Okay, so now we need to apply this resource into our controller here, so that when you are returning this data, instead of just returning a simple JSON, we want to return that in a way that we want. So to do so, what I'll do, I'll just say, instead of just returning this one, I'll just remove that response, and I'll say return new, then author resource. Okay, and then inside it is where we are going to pass this author. Okay, so author, you see, so that's how easy you can just do that. And now if you try to create a new author, so let's go back to the client, which is our postman, and now let's try to create another user, which is author. So let's say author 2, and I'll just leave that one, or I can just change this one to be, let's say, Kenya. And now let's try to create that author. And now you can see here what has been returned. So you can see we have the data, the name, bio, and nationality only. So we have just transformed the data from returning the ID, which is not ideal for security reasons. So we are not supposed to return the IDs to our users. So by using the resource, you can see how easy you can just transform the data. But let's say, for example, the name of the author here, you want to transform it to be capitalized. So to do so, it's just easy. Here you can just go to the resource, and here when you are returning this name, you can just say string to upper. You can just use that simple method, but if you want to use the string helper, also it is possible by using, let's say, you can just try to use this helper method. So for example, you can just say to upper case, so that will work, and now it will work just fine as using this one. So you can just do that and it will work just fine. So by using this way means that our name will be all capitalized to our users. So let's test that. So for example here, and for the nationality, we want to make this to be a lowercase. So let's try that. So here we are going to say string to lower. Okay, so that's cool. Now let's try again. Now let's create another author 3, and now this should be, let's say, United States. Okay, and now let's try to save. You can see now author 3, you see the name is in capital letter. So let me zoom a little bit so that you can see that. So this is the capital letters, but for the nationality you can see it is in lower letters. So you can see that's how easy you can just transform your data. But also, as I've mentioned before, let's say you may need to show the related let's say data for that author. So for example, here we want also to retrieve the details of the author. So down here we can also use the author resource to return our data. So what we are going to do is to use the author. So let me just show you. So here, remove that, and here we are going to say author resource, and then here I'm going to return this in a collection, and then I'm going to say request, authors. Let's return authors here. Okay, and then after that means that if you try to access this paginated data, now if we go back here to this one, I think we should change this one to get authors. Okay, so this is for getting authors. Now let's try, and now you can see here, so the name is null. Okay, now let's see why this return null. Okay, now let's check from here, and here we have the author. Okay, now inside the author here, okay, now this is the issue here. So now for when you are creating data here, because you are returning this at the object, so means that the details you can just access them by using the request. But when you are returning the collection, means that you have to use this way. So let me just show you how to do that. So instead of just accessing them by using request, use this way to access that object basically. So this is used to reference the object that you are calling, which will be the author resource as a class. So let me show you. Now after changing that, now means that if we go back here and try to fetch again our authors, now we should be able to see the authors as we expected. So you see, so this is basically a way that you should be using this object. But also when you are creating the authors, it will work just as we expected. So for example, if you go back here and let's say create author 4 and change this one, let's say to United Kingdom, and then try to send that request, and now you can see we have author 4 and also we have the United Kingdom. So it will work just as we expect. So here you can see we have 3 authors. So if we try to send again, now we have 4 authors. But also you can see the pagination is working fine, and we are still on page 1 because we don't have the total number of authors is still 4, so we are not being able to be sent to another pages. So you can see the last pages are also on page 1. Okay, so then now that's how easy you can just create the get and create author request. So now let's try to add another functionality for showing a certain or by fetching a specific author. Okay, so to do so, now let's start by creating the following functionality. So here I'm going to say author because we are retrieving only one author. So here I'm going to say author, then I'm going to so you can use this way. So for example, you can say author, and then you can just find that author here by using that ID. Okay, and then after that you can just return the new author resource. Okay, and then from that you can just pass the author that you get from this find method. And after that, now means you are supposed to provide an ID as a string, which will be a parameter in your route. So here, let's create a new request, and then let's name it to get an author. Means we get just a specified author. So here we are using the get, and we are going to add / and then we are, let's say we want to get the first author. So by providing that ID means that it will be passed down here, and then it will be accessible by this method, and then after that it will return the specific author. So now let's try and send that request, and now we can see we have the author that we wanted. So if you change that to 2, we will get the second author. You see, author 2, and you can just do that for author 4 and 3, and it will work just fine. But here I will suppose instead of just passing this way, so you can just try to pass the model if you are using, let's say, model binding. So you can just say, let's say, author, and here you can just say author, and then instead of finding that author here, you can just remove that, and this will be the author that you are going to return, because this will find that author by resolving the ID that comes here, and it will find that author in this model, and then after that, that model will be accessible here. But for example, if you want also to return the books that are related to the specific author, so from here we can just use the with method that you are going to use to call the relationships that you want to call. So for example, here on your author, here we have the relationship with books, so we can just call that here. So we can just say books, okay, and then after that means we are going to have the books on your relationship on your data that is returned here on get authors, but we will not be able to see them, because here, if you see, we are not be able to see the books that has been returned. Why? Because here on resource we have transformed that to only show these details. But what if we want to show the actually the books that are related to this specific author? So to do so means you will need to specify here the books. So for example, we can just say, let's say we want to know the books count that this author has. Instead of returning all the books, we can just return only the books count. So here we can just use this, and then we can say, we can use when. So this will retrieve details conditionally. So for example, we can just say when this when relationship loaded. So we can just say relation loaded, and then we are going to specify the relationship, and then we are going to say this, then books, then we need to get the counts, okay, the count, like that way, okay. So I believe this will be just a good way for you to be able to get the count of the books that a specific author has. So now let's try. You can see, so here we have 0 books count, because all of these authors, they don't have any books in their database. So we will just create books down here, and then we will see how this works. But the best thing here, why we have used it this way, because we want you to only retrieve or only to run this query when there is a relationship, and that relationship has been loaded. So here, if by any means that the relationship is not loaded, so means that we will not get any error here, okay. So that's good. Now let's go back and try to update our author. So to do so, for example, we may need to update the update method here. So what we are going to do is to change that. So when you are updating details, for example, we need to also use the validation request, which is this one. So we need to use that validation request here, and this will be a request. And then let's say you can pass this way, but also you can use the model binding as I've showed you here. So you can use the model binding, which I believe this is a best practice. So let's say author, okay, let's say author that way. And then down here, you can be able to call that author. And then from there, you can call the update method. And then you can just get the validated data from the request, which is a store author request. So here we can just get the validated data. I mean the validated. And then means we are going to update the author by using the validated data. So this validated data, as I've shown you before, they are coming from here. Okay. So let's go back here. And this is how easy you can just do that. But when you have updated the user, we want to see the data that we have updated. So let's return the updated user by using the resource, okay, as we've been doing before. So here we are going to return the author, okay, like that way. So this will be helpful when you are trying to update that user. So here on the Postman, we are going to create a new request, and we will call it update user. And basically on when you are using resourceful controllers, when you are doing update, you can use the put method. So I'll put that here, and then I'm going to paste that. And after that, we need to provide the fields that we are updating. So for example, we are going to update the name. We are going to update the bio. Also, we need to update the nationality. Okay. And then after that means that let's say for example the user will not put anything here, and we want to check if the validation works. So for now, if you try to send this one, we will not see any error. Why? Because oh no, this should be put. Now let's try again. Yeah, so you can see the method is not allowed. Why? Because we have used this way. Because we have used this way without passing the specified author ID here. So that's why we don't get the validation errors, because here, as you remember, we've passed the author as a model binding way. So we need to put here the ID of that specific author. So let's say we want to update the first author. So we have to put the / and then you provide the ID of that specific author. And now let's try to send. And now we don't see any error, any validation error. Why? Because you need also to specify the heading for this request to accept JSON data. So here you can see specify that and try again. And now let's go back to JSON. You can see the name field is required. So that's how easy you can just do that. So you can test the validations. So now if we want to update the first user, so the first user, as you remember, was the name was this one. So it was Shadrach JM, but I want to change that one, let's say from that to, let's say, code with SJM. And then the bio, we can just leave it, let's say we can just leave it blank, and also the nationality, because these are not required fields. So now let's try to send that request. And now you can see code with SJM, and the bio has been null and the nationality also is empty. Why? Because we have just updated all of those fields. But if we go back here like this way and put that data, and let's say if we put that back to Tanzania, let's say Tanzania, this way, Tanzania, and save. Now we should see this way. But if you want to, let's say, to exclude this field, so you need to uncheck this one. So we can uncheck that way. And then if we save this, means that this will not be updated. So let's change. And you can see nothing has changed. So let's say, for example, we want to change this bio. So instead of that one, let's say we can put null and then send. So you see the bio has been changed, but the nationality will not be updated because we have excluded it from the parameters. So you can see here from the parameter it is not found, but if you check it, you see it will be added that. Okay, so now this is the best way for you to be able to update the details, and this will return the details that you want. Okay, now here we want also to have a way to destroy our data or to delete our data. So to do so, now let's go back here on our method, and from here we are going to pass the ID of that specific author. So we will use the model binding. So we are going to say author, and from here we are going to get the specific author, and then we are going to call the delete method. Okay, and then after that we need to return a response to our user. So for example, we can just say return response, then in JSON format, and you can just say, let's say, a message to notify your user that the data was deleted successful. Okay, so that way. Okay, and now terminate this one. And now if you want to try this one, means that you have to go back to the terminal, I mean to the client, and then here create a new request, and let's call it delete author, and then pass down the author, I mean the URL, and then let me remove this one. Okay, and then after that let's go back to the post method. So you can put the post or you can use the delete. So all of these will work. So let's put the delete here. And now as we have passed this one, now you need to specify the application to accept the JSON values. So let's put it that way. And then here means we are going to delete the first author. So now let's try. Now you can see the data was deleted. And now if we go back to get authors and try to send again that request, now you see we don't have the first author. So you see we have only author 2, 3, and 4, and the author 1 has been deleted. So that's how easy we have just created the CRUD operation on our API. So now the next step will be to add the CRUD operations for members, borrowings, and the books. So the next one will be the books basically, and then we are going to add the members, and after that we are going to finish up with borrowings. After that is when we are going to add the authentication for our APIs. Okay, so now let's deal with the books API. So we are going to start to build the API endpoints and all logics that are required for managing our books. So now let's go back to the code here, and the first step will be to create the controller for the books. I'll create a controller here by using this command, php artisan make controller, and then I'll give the name of the controller, which will be book controller, and then I'll provide a flag for making sure that we generate the API controller. Okay, so now that is fine. Remember, we have to create the validation request class, so we are going to create php make request, and we are going to say store book request. And lastly, we need to have the resource, so we are going to say create resource, and we are going to say book resource. Okay, so after creating all of those three classes, now let's close that and let's go back here. And here on the HTTP, we are going to have the controller created, which is this one, that will have the index, store, show, update, and destroy, without including the create and edit methods. But also we have a request directory where we have this new class, which is called the store book request. And here you can see we have the authorize and the rules. As I did before, here I put it to true because we don't have the authorization functionality yet. So now let's leave it that way. And then here on validation, we will perform all the validations, but also we have the new resource class, which is this one. So from here, we are going to return our array. So I'll just remove that and return just an empty array like that way. So we'll do that in a minute. So now let's go back here. And here we need to start to show or to return the list of all books that we have in our application. So to do so, here we are going to get all the books. So I'll say books, then I'll say book, which is our model, and then I'm going to paginate as I did before. So I want to get only 10 books. Why we do paginate? Because we want to improve the API performance. So instead of the user to get all the list of books, so you can have, let's say, 100 or thousands of the books, so it will take so long for your API to respond. So that's why we apply the pagination, so that the user can see, let's say, 10 books per request, and they can fetch as they go. So that's how cool this is. So now, after being able to paginate our books, now we want to return the list of books. So as we did before, we want to return this inside the book resource. So here we are going to return book resource, and then what we are going to do is to return a collection of books. So let's call the books here that way. And then on this resource, now let's update it as we want to return only the details that we want. So here on books, let's say I want to return the title of the book. So what we'll do, we'll use this, then the title. So it means that we are going to use all the fields that we are supposed to have. So I'll just paste the fields. Okay, so for SBN, description, generally published date, total copies, available copies, price, cover page, which is our cover images, and the status. And then we are going to have additional fields, because on our model here, on our book, let's go back here, on our book model, we have this method to check if that book is available. So we are going to call this method here on our resource to make sure that the user can see if this book is available. So here we are going to say is available. Okay, and here we are going to say this, and then we are going to say is available. So that method will return the true or false based on what we defined here. Okay. Also, we want to get the details of the author of that specific book. So we're going to say author, and then here let's have the comma, and down here what we are going to do is to return the details of our author. But what we are going to do, so that's how easy you can just do that. So what I'm going to do, instead of calling here the relationship for the book, but the easiest way that I can do, I can just do this. So I can just return author resource, okay, and then I'm going to return, I can just pass here the ID of that specific author, but to be very precise, here on our book controller here, I just want to call the relationship. So I'm going to say with, and then I'm going to call the author relationship. Remember that relationship that we had here, so which is this one. So that is the relationship that I'll call here. And then after that, here we are going to use the same way to make sure that we call the relationship when it is loaded. So we are going to say when loaded, then we are going to pass down the relationship name. Okay, so this will help us to get the details of the relationship, I mean the details of the author, and it will be transformed to what we have here on the author resource. Okay, so that's the essence of using these resources. So they help you to transform and to present data in a way that the users will be very fair with it. Okay, so now after that, now let's go and go back to the controller here, and now we can be able to retrieve the books that we have in our system. So now let's go back here, and I'll just close all of this. So I'll just save in order for me to be able to close them. So if you really need to save, it will ask you if you want to save basically, but let me just remove these. Okay, so now on our authors we are done. Now let's go to the books, and here we need to add the new request, and we are going to say get all books, and here we want to change this one, but in order for that to work, we need to add that in our api.php here. So we need to add that. So down here I'll say books. So we are going to define a route, and then we are going to say API resource, and then here we are going to say the name of the resource will be books, and then the controller will be book controller. Okay, and then that is a class, and then we are going to get it that way. Okay, so after that means that here we will be able to get the books by using books, and then after that here we need to have a get, but remember to put here the accept application JSON, and after that now we can be able to see the list of books. Okay, now you can see we don't have any book, that's why you can see on data we have empty values. Okay, and you can see the total number of books here, it is 0. So now we need to have a way to create the book. So now let's add a new request, and we will call it create book, and then after that we'll have something like that, and this should be a post method, and then from here we are going to pass all the fields that we want to fill in order to create the detailed book. Okay, so now let's go back here and perform the functionality first of storing the book, and then we are going to see how to call it. So now here we are going to use first the request class that we created, which is this one, store book request. So call it here store book request. This is essential for validation, as I've mentioned before. So now let me just close this one. Here we have the request, and now let's perform the functionality of saving this book. So what we are going to say book, and then we want to store that in our book model, and then we are going to say create, which we will call all the validated data as we did before. So validated, and then after that we need to load all the related author. For that specific book, we want to load the author of that book, so that when we are returning it, we will show the book and the author, so that the resource that we have created here won't miss this relationship. So that is why here I have to load the author. Let me load the author here. So load. Then I'm going to pass the name of the relationship, which is author. And then after that, down here, we are going to return a new book resource. And then we are going to pass the book object that we get from here. Then you load the author, and then we are going to return it to the book resource. Okay, so now means we are able to create a new book, but here on our resource still we didn't have the functionality to show. Okay, this is done. On book request we don't have the functionality for validation. So now let's perform that very quickly. So here the first thing will be to validate the title of the book. I'm going to say for the title, this should be required. So we need to make sure that it's a string, and you can put the length if you want. So for me, I just put here 255. And then another thing will be the ISBN, and this is required, and it should be unique. So this should be unique on your books table, and it should be an SIBN. So this is the field that we are going to make sure that it is unique. And then down here we are going to make sure that we have another fields for description. Okay, and this is nullable, so we can just make this to be nullable, and you can put the strengths the length if you want. And for me, I'll just remove that because that is a description. Also, I want to add the author ID. So this is required basically. We need to make sure that the user has passed the author ID. And also we need to make sure that the ID that was passed should make sure that it exists on the authors table. Okay, and the field that we are checking is the ID. Next will be the generally. So generally, so this generally is nullable, so it can be nullable actually. And then we need to make sure that this is the string, and you can put other validations as you want. Okay, the next thing will be the published date. Published date, and then we can just say this can be nullable. So you need to make sure that you are checking the migration the way that you created, so that it will not have any complication. So you can see here the published art. So we need to make sure that this is published art, so that we cannot make any issue here. So published art, okay, and here it is not required. Okay, so that's cool. So this we can just make sure that it's a date. Okay, but also we can add other fields for total copies. Then we should make sure that this is required, and this should be an integer, and the minimum value that the user can put can be 1. Okay, you can continue to price and make sure that this is nullable, and this can be numeric, and the minimum can be 0, and also the cover image, which can be null, and this can be a string. Okay, and after that, I believe that is fine. Okay, now that's good. Now let's try and see if this works, because now we have the method here, we have the request here, and now we are supposed to see if this works, because already we've added it in our api.php, so that is accessible here. Okay, so the fields here, we need to have the title, we need to have the ISBN, we need to have the description, we need to have the author ID, we need to have the January, we need to have the published at, also we need to have the total copies, which will be the total number of copies, and we need to have the price, and without forgetting the cover image. Okay, after that, on headers, make sure that it accepts the application JSON. Okay, and then after that, you can try to see if the validation works as we expected, so we can try to send that request without filling anything. And here you can see the errors, so you can see the title field is required and 3 more, which is given here. So you can see the title is required, ISBN, author ID, and the total copies. Okay, so you can see the validation is working as we expected, and now it's time to test the magic. So now let's try to put here the details. So for example, for the title, so I'll just paste here some of the dummy datas. So let me try to paste some of the things. So let me just write something here. Book 1. On the ISBN, we can just put something like, let's say, ISBN 01, like that. And on description, I can just leave it blank. Author ID, I can just put 2, because the first one we deleted. So let's check for the generally. Now we can just make that to be, let's say, fiction. For published date, we can just put a date like 2020, then 02, then 03. Okay, then we can have, let's say, the total number of copies can be 2, the price can be, let's say, $20. The cover image, we can just put that, we can just left that blank because it is not required here. So now let's try and send the request, and now we can see 201, and you can see the data is created. Now you see we have been returned with the details of the book. So book 1, ISBN, the description, generally published date. Okay, so this was null because of this thing here. It should be published the date here on your resource. So it should be published the at, okay? It should be published the at. We'll change that to, and now let's go back here and try to send again. Oh, I was trying to resend, to recreate, so that's why you see the ISBN has already been taken. So it means that the validation works well because I tried to recreate the same book. But here, if I change that ISBN, let's say to 2, and then this should be, let's say, book 2, and let's say the same author. So let's say that author created the fiction books. So this number of copies, let's say, is 20, and the price for this one is 200, and the cover image, you can just left it blank like that. And now if we try to save that and send the request, now you can see we have the book 2 ISBN, we have the fiction published the at. Oh, why this is messing up? Published the at. This is from the database. Now let's check on our model. I guess on our model we didn't. Yeah, so you can see here there is an issue. Yeah, so now if we try to add another one, it will be good. But basically it is not a required field. That's why you see it is not giving us any validation errors. So now that's cool. We are able to create books. So now let's try to get the books. Now let's fetch. And here you can see we have the list of books. So we have the book 1 and we have the book 2. And basically you can see the details of the author here. So you can see the name of the author, the bio, the nationality, and you can see the number of copies of books that they have written. So you can see it has 2 books, and in a similar way you can see from there. Okay, yeah. So now after doing that, now let's create another route for getting a certain specific book. So now let's create that here. So let's start by creating the request, and let's name it get a book. Okay, like that way, and then you are supposed to provide the ID of the book. So for example, that way. So this ideally we are supposed to get a certain specific book. So to do so, let's perform the functionality for getting that book from our controller. So what we are going to do is to edit the show method. As I did before, I'm going to use the model binding. So I'm going to say book, and then I'm going to get a book from this model right here, and then instead of calling it from the model, I just load the author, which is the relationship that we need, and then we are going just to return the new book. So this should be book resource. Okay, then return that book. So we are going to pass it as a parameter that will come to this here, and then after that all of these details will be shown as we expected. So now here, this is how you are getting a certain specific book. And as you can see, by using the resources and the request, your controllers remain very clean, as you can see here. So this is just easy on how you can just get those details and how you store. Instead of expanding this, we are just using the book resource to return the data. You can see for the show, you are just having 2 lines, but if you change that and use the other ways around, you can see the controllers can have a lot of things. But by using the resources, the controllers remain very clean, and this is ideally a best way to create your controllers, so it is easier for other developers to come and use the code that you have written. Okay, and after that, now let's try to get a certain book. Like let's say we want to get the book 1. Now let's send, and down here you can see the book 1 has been retrieved successful. You can see the details of the author. You can try for the book number 2. You see, this is book 2. And if you try for book 3, which does not exist, let's see. See, so you are getting an error here. Okay, so we are getting this error. So we may need to perform a way to show the error so that the user can know, because now if the user will be returned with this error, so this will not be a very good way to represent an error to a user. So what we can do, we can just have a try and catch here. So this will be for try, and then here we are going to return the exception, and then what we are going to do here, we are just going to return response in JSON format. What we are going to say, we are going to say the message that we get. We can just actually, if you are doing development, you can just return here the message from the exception, the method that will be captured. But when you are returning the messages to a user, it is ideally the good way to give a standard message. Let's say you can say the book is not found. Okay, so that will be a very standard method that the message that you can return. But also you can pass something else like a status. You can say, like, let's say you can say this is false. Okay, and also you can return here the status code, like you can say this is 404, like that way. And then after that, if we go back here and try to retrieve the non-existing book and try to send again that request, okay, still we get this. Okay, now let's see from here. And still we get this because here we need to make sure that it accepts the application JSON. So now let's try that. And here you can see no query result for the model, this one. Okay, so you can see at least the message was actually good, because this error we get because here we are doing model binding. But if we had this the way before, like this string, then ID, and then from here, if you have the book and have the book model and find, then the ID, if you do something like this, I guess this should work fine. Okay, now let's say, let me remove that first and let's try again. Attempt to read this one on so it is supposed to catch this error here. Let's use find or fail, and let's see if that will work. Yeah, so you can see if you apply the find or fail, because we just want to capture the error or the exception that will happen here, so we are forcing to get the error, so that here you can just even reuse this one, because if you don't put this one, means that you will not get the details of the author. Okay, but at first it was giving the error when you use this one, because it was just continuing after finding that ID, even if it is not found. So it was continuing to execute the following codes. But if you use find and fail, means that fail will throw an error when the ID will not be found. So after that, when it will throw an error, that error will be triggering the catch. So that's when you see this message returned. So it will not continue to execute the remaining code. So the rest of code will not be executed. That's why you see this error comes up here. So this is a basic standard way to show the user. But if you want to debug this, so this is where you can just say, for example, you can say error, and then you can show the error by, let's say, instead of just get the message like that way. Okay, and now if you go back here and try to send again that request, here you can see error, then no query result for model, this one found. Okay, so that's how easy you can just do that if you want to debug. But for a standard way to show your users errors, this is a basic way to do it. So you can customize that and do anything that you feel will fit your needs. So for showing the book, that is the best way to do it. And for now, let's focus on a way for us to be able to update the book. So the first thing will be to update this request to use the store book request. Okay, after that, let's bind here the model. So we are going to use the book and then a book, and then after that we are just going to use the validated data, because we need to validate our book before performing an update. So let's call the update method, and inside it we are going to get the request and get the validated data. And after getting the validated data is where we are going to perform the validation. After that, we are going to load the let me say we are going to load the author. Let's call the load, then call the author, which is our relationship between the book and the author, and then we are going to return the new request, book resource, and then we are going to pass the book. Okay, that way. So this will perform the validation first by using this book store book request. After that, the validated data will be available through this object request, and then after that, that object will be used to update that specific book. Okay, and then after that, you see down here, we are going to return the updated details of that specific book by using the book resource. So now let's go and try to update any of our book. Okay, now let's go back here and we are going to create a new request, and we will call it update a book. And here we are going to pass the ID of the book that we want to update. So it will be the book 1, and we are going to pass the details that we want to update. So for example, I want to update the title. Okay, so title, let's say ISBN. I don't want to update the ISBN, so I can just leave that. And I want to update the description. Okay, so as you remember here, the book 1, you can see this is called book 1, and also you see the description is null. So when I update that one, I want to change the title. So I'll just say, let's say book 3, And then for description, I'll just say just TS sample description. Sample description, okay? And then after that, now you need to change this one to be put, okay? Because we are doing update, and you make sure that here you say accept application JSON, okay? And then after that, now let's try to send that request. And basically there is other fields that are required. I believe that will give us error here, which will be validation error, you see. So the ISBN, auth ID, and the total number of copies, you should make sure that you put them here. So ISBN, so you will not change the ISBN basically. So what you will do, I'll just make sure that it is the same. So it will be this one. So let me copy that and let me paste it here. And we also need the author ID, which I believe is number 2, and I'll change that to number 3. Also for the total number of copies, I'll change that to 10, let's say, okay? And then after that, let's try to send that request. ISBN has already been taken. So, okay, here we are trying to update, but you can see the ISBN will give you an error. So what we are going to do, this should be on a validation. So let's go back to the store book request here, and here we will put this to be unique, okay? So to make sure that it accepts this book when you are updating it, so let's do the following. So here what I'll do, on the validation of this ISBN, so means instead of just passing here the unique, I'll just update that to this way. So let me just change that and let me show you what we will do. Okay, so I'll do the following. So I'll change this one to be in an array. So it will be an associative array. And then I'll remove this one for unique changing, for checking in the uniqueness. And then here I'm going to use another way of checking that validation. So what I'll do, I'll just use the role helper method. So here I'm going to say unique, and then because we are getting we need to check that on books, so here I'll pass the name of the table. So you can see from here the unique. Let me just import this one first. So the validation rule, so you can see here it requires the name of the table and the column that you are going to check for the uniqueness. So we are going to say the ISBN, okay? And then after that, we need to tell it to know if the route, this route, it is on books. Basically it will be book, and then we are going to say ID, okay? So what I'm doing here, I will just ignore this ID. Why? Because what I'm doing here, I'm ignoring the current ID if that ID already exists, but we are ignoring it because by using this way, by using this route, because we are using the model binding on our controller here. So that's why. But if we will put here just an ID, it will be different when you are using it. So if we will not put this way, so if we just put here a string then ID, so to use it here, we were just supposed to pass something like this. So we were just supposed to say this, then just book, then ID. So that was a way that we are supposed to do. So, but because we are using model binding on your controller, so that's why you are supposed to check it from the route here. So like this way. So now let's try again and see if this works. Or let me just try again and send. Okay. Validation, the validator string does not exist. Validator required. Let's check again here. Okay, yeah. So here this should be different items of the array. So let's put this way and this way. Okay. So it should be this way because this is an associative array. Okay. Now let's go back and try again. And now you see the book has been updated. So now it is called book 3. And you can see the description. This is just a simple description. You can see the number of copies. And you can see the author now is author number 3. So you can just change that. For example, we can put this one, let's say, to author number 2. And you'll see that updating. You can see here author number 2, and the details have been updated successful. So this is quite a simplest way that you can use to ignore the current data if it already exists, because when you are creating this will not give you any error, but when you are just updating, so we were getting the error for validation because it will say that ID has already been taken. So this is the best way to resolve that issue. Okay, so now that works fine. So now the remaining functionality is just the delete functionality. So what I'll do, I'll just put here another model binding. I'll just say book, then my book, and then I'll just do the similar way that we did before. So we'll get that book, and we'll call the delete method, and then after that we are just going to return a response in JSON format. So return a response, in JSON format, and then we are going to say book deleted successfully, and then you can say, let's say this is true, this is status lesson. So it's not necessary, I'm just putting it there so that you can see a way to put something there, the extra thing that you want to put. So for the status, you can just put anything that you, the correct status for that. But for now, I'll just put 200 because I just want to show that the process was successful. So if I don't put anything, it will be returned in 200. So now let's try and delete a certain book. So now let's add a new request. And let's call it delete a book. And from here, I will just remove these parameters. Okay. And here, I just want to delete, let's say, the first book. Okay. And now I'll put delete as in my method. And then I'll just say accept application JSON. Okay, so now let's try. See, book deleted successful, and here I didn't put anything, so this should be a message. Should be message. So this will be helpful when let's say you want to utilize this API and you want to retrieve the message. So by using this one, it will be easier for your users to be able to see it. So now it was just 0 because I didn't put that value. So that's how easy you can just do that. So if you go back here and try to get the books, so you'll not see the book number 1. So you see we have only the book number 2. Okay, so that's how cool this API will be. But for example, here on the API, so for example, I'll just create another book. And what I can do basically, we can just add the factory so that we can be able to create mocking books. So for example, here on our book, I just want to update this one so that we can create a mocking book. So let me just update that in a minute. So I'll just paste the code that I've already prepared so that we can go quickly, and I'll explain everything to you. So here I'll just import the author. So here we have the title, we have the ISBN, we have the description, author ID, which will come from a random author, and then we have the genre that will come from these different elements. So the fiction, non-fiction, mystery, romance, and everything. And also we have the published date, which should change to published at. And then we have the total number of copies, available copies, price, cover image, and also the status, which we didn't add on our resource here. So let's add, oh, this is one. So it is there, okay? So we don't need to update that. And now after adding this factory, now let's add it on our database seeder. Now let's come here and let's call the book method and call the factory, and I want to add, let's say, 30 books, and then I'll call the create method, and make sure that here you are using this trait, which is use as a factory. So now if we go back here on your terminal and run php @b, then seed, oh, I've messed up here, so this should be db, okay? So you see it was seeding those details, and now if we go back here and try to retrieve all the books, so let's try to retrieve all the books here, send. So this is the book 1, you see this is a book that has been created. So you see from here, see, so if you scroll down here you see, so the last page now is page number 4, the current is page number 1, and here you can see we have the links for page 1, page 2, 3, and 4. Basically the next page will be the page number 2, and here per page we have the only 10 numbers, but then the total numbers we have 31 because we have added 30 books, so plus the one that we had before, so it will be 31. So now that's how easy you can just do that. But let's say for example you want to navigate to page number 2, so what you will do here, you will just add a parameter. So here you just add the parameter and call it page here, so as that, and then the value of the page you just mention. So for example you want to navigate to page number 3, so put here number 3, and that will be added here on query as a query parameter, and then if you click that, then you should be able to access the page number 3, and you see now the page number 3 is active and page number 1 is not active. So the books that you will see from here, they will not be the one that was from page number 1, so it will be from page number 3, okay? So now that's how easy you can just change that, let's say to page number 1, again number 2, let's say, and search. So basically you can see the page number 3 is not active, so now the page number 2 is the one that is active. So if you preview, you will see these data in this tabular form. So this is the best feature that Postman has. So you can see those details in tabular form. So you can see, so these will be the tables that shows those details. Okay, you can see those like that way. You can see the metadata if they had, and let's go back here. So that's how easy you can just do that. Okay, so after that, let's say you want to search for these details. So how you are going to add the search functionality on your resource. So let me just show you. I mean on your controller or on your API. So let's add that functionality into our book controller. So let's go back here when you are fetching all the details. So here, instead of getting the book, I'll just change that to be a query, because I just want to update that query. So here, instead of paginating it directly on there, we will just get the author. Okay, and then after that, here is where we are going to perform the search functionality, and from there we are going to have a check condition. So what we'll do, we'll just check from here. Basically, we are going to pass the request class, so that we can be able to access all the parameters that are coming from the request here. Okay, so that's why I've added that, and then here I can be able to check from the request if it has the search parameter. Okay, so here we will use the search parameter instead of page. Here we will change it to be search. So if it will have the search parameter, okay, just remove that. So it will have that search parameter is when we are going to perform this functionality. So down here, to search for that query, so I'm going to say search will be equals to request, then search. Okay, after that, here let's perform this query by checking where. Then I'm going to use a closure function or a callback function. Then I'm going to say a query. I'm going to use the search parameter, and then from there on my function I'm going to execute the following. So here from this query that we have created, we are going to check where the title will be like the one that comes from the check. So what we are going to have here is, then you are supposed to put the percentage symbols or characters, which means that if you put it in front here, it will check if it starts with a certain value. If you put just in front, it will check if it ends with that value. But if you put it in front and at the end, means that you are going to check the whole word. Okay, so here I'm going to pass the search term, which is this one. Okay, so here means we are checking the full text matching. So we are matching this one against the one in database. Okay, so if you want just to check if it starts with that word, so you are just going to pass the percentage character just in front, or if you want to check if it ends with that, as I've explained. So let's put that way. So we want to get that full text check, and then after that, or where. So for example, or where user has passed the ISBN instead. So we just want to check the same way. So we'll pass down, let's say percentage, then the search parameter, or if the user has searched or where has, let's say if the user has searched for the name of the author, for example. So what we will do, we're going to use the or where has author, then we are going to have a callback function here. Then we are going to pass the author, let's say, query. So this will be a new query parameter that we are going to create. And then we are going to say use the search term. Then in that function, we are going to use the author query, check where the name that was passed will be matching the name from the author table. So we're going to check if it's likely match the search term. Okay, terminate there. Similar way, we need to have the braces here. So braces and here. Okay. And then after that, terminate it there too. So this is our query that we want to use. Okay. And then after that, after having the if condition, now down here, so the book or the books will be from query, and then is where we are going to paginate those details. Okay, that way. So after applying the search, then is where we are going to paginate the details. So now if we go back here and add the search functionality, let's say we want to search for, let's say just search for this one. Okay, so let's put that here, let's paste it there, and then let's try to search. And here you can see we have only get the first value because that is the matching for that. But if let's say you change that, let's say to let's say the value, just put there A, for example. So because I assume A will be matching with many books, so let's try to send. So we'll get more books here, I believe. So you see, there is book 2. See? So there is a lot of books here because the search will get that A is found on almost all of the books. Okay? But if you change that to, let's say, AU, and then you send, so you see nothing was found. So the search functionality works very perfect. But also, let's say, for example, a user can try to, let's say, to filter by using genres. Okay, so for example, let's say the user wanted to use genre instead of search. So they want to filter the books by using the genre. Okay, so we need to perform the functionality for that too. Okay, so what we are going to do here is to add another if condition, and what we will do, we will just check if we have that value on our request. So let's say genre. Okay, and then after that, here we are going to check that from the query where genre equals to generally from the request. Yeah, so that's cool. And from there, this will work as we expected. So if we go back here and try to use the generally instead of search. So for example, if we want to check for the genres that we want, for example, if I don't put this one and try to search, let me see one of the genre here. So let's say we use this one, so the fiction one, and let me put that back, and here I'm going to pass that. Okay, and now let's try to search, and here you can see we have the following details. So you see there is a books there, and we have only 7 books in total. So only 7 books are on the genre of fiction. So that's how easy you can just do the filters and search functionality to your API. Okay, so now that's cool. Now I believe that will give you the basic foundation for creating a robust controllers and API in general. So now the next step will be to add the member controller. So we'll do that in a minute. Okay, so now let's work on member controller so that we can make all the logics that are related to our member. So what we'll do, let me clear my terminal. Then I'm going to create a controller as we did before. So PHP @ make controller. Then I'll give the name of the controller to be member controller. And then I'll give the flag of API so that it will create the methods that we need for creating the API CRUD operations. Okay. And you can see the controller has been created here, but also we will create the request class. So PHP @ make request. Then the name of the request will be store member request. And then we need to create the resource. Okay, so resource, and then it will be member resource. Okay. Then after that, we will repeat the same procedures that we were doing on other controllers. So the first step will be to update the controller for member so that we can be able to retrieve all the members that exist in our system. So to do so, I'll add the search functionality on this. So what I'll start by creating the query parameter, variable, and then I'll fetch all the members with the active borrowings. So make sure that you check this one because that is the relationship that we have here. So active borrowings that belongs to, actually it will get all the borrowings that have the status of borrowed. Okay, so here means we get that members with their active borrowings so that we can see all the books that they have that they borrowed from our library. And then after that we are going to have an if condition here, and to check if there is any request. Let's create the request here, then as search. So make sure you pass here the request object and then request. So it will be like that. Oh, it should be this way. Request and then request. Okay, now we can use it here, and here you can create a variable for search as we did before, and then you can assign it to the search term from the request. Search from the request, and then after that we can continue with our query, and then from the query we can check where. Then we have the closure function so that we can create another query here, and then we are going to say use the search term, use the search, and then in that query that we have created, is where we are going to check the where condition, where the name of the member will be like, put the percentage mark there, and then have the braces. Then we are going to pass the search term and use the double quoted here. Okay, that way. And also we are going to check where the email. So this is just the field that I want the user to be able to search with. So you can change that to whatever you think will be fine. And here we are going to check for the search term. So let's have the percentages and the braces and then the search term. Okay. And then after that, you can also check for the phone number or anything else, because on members, as we remember, we have the phone number, email, name, and any other thing that you can use. But for now, I'll just check for the name and the emails. Okay. And then after that, we need also to be able to filter our members by using their status. So here I'll check for request if has status. Okay, status. And then after that, we are going to run a query, and we are going to say where status column will be equals to the status coming from the request. Okay, net there. And then after that is where we are going to get our members, get members. So here we're going to say query, or you can just define parameter, the variable called members, and then from there we will get it from the query, and then we are going to say pagenet. So we are going to pagenet as we did before, and then here, down here is where we are going to return our member resource. Okay, so member resource, and from it we are going to return a collection of members that we have here, members that we get here. Okay, so now this will work just fine. So I want to continue the implementation of this member resource. So let me return an empty array, and then let's update it to make sure that it works fine as we are supposed it to be. So I'll just paste in the code, then I'll explain to you everything that you need to understand. Okay, I've already prepared this, okay, so that we can fast forward our video. And here you can see I am returning the ID of the member, which is not necessary, but you can show that if you want, and you can remove it if you don't want the users to be able to see the IDs. But also I'm returning the name, I'm returning the email, the phone number, address, and membership date, also the status. But for the active borrowing count, then I'm using the when method, which will be executed conditionally. So the condition will be when the relationship was loaded. So the active borrowings is the relationship that we are loading here. Okay, so we'll just check if when that relationship will be loaded is when we are going to load the active borrowings, and then from it we are going to get the count of the active borrowings. Okay, so after that now means we will be able to get all the members. Now let's add the functionality to create the member so that we can be able to test if the functionality works as we expected. Okay, so now on store, as we did before, here you need to change this one to member store member request. This is the request class that we have created. So this one should be true. Okay, and if you go back here, that is the one that we are going to use to store here. So we are going to say member, then we are going to create by using the validated datas, and then after that we are going to return a new object of member resource. Okay, and inside it we are going to pass the member that we have created. Okay, so now that's how we are going to create the new member, but here we need to perform the rules. So I'll just paste another rules there. So let me just paste that. So here it will be this way. So we are checking for the name to be required, the email to be required, and it should be email, but also it should be unique. But remember on how we perform the unique check when you are doing the update. So I'll just update that in a moment. So for now, let's just leave it that way. And then you have the phone number, which can be nullable, address can be nullable, membership date, which should be date, and the status, which is required. Okay, so now that is how we are going to validate when you are creating a member. So now we can be able to test the member creation. So now let's finish up with the other remaining task for show, update, and destroy, so that when we start to test it, we'll just test it completely. So now let's do a model binding here. So let's do model binding. So member, then we are going to have the member, and then what we'll do, we'll just load the relationship of active borrowings, okay. Then after that, we can return the new object member resource. Okay, then we are going to pass the member there. But here on member, we have also this relationship called the borrowings, but this one is checking just the active ones, but this one is checking for all borrowings. So let's call all of them here. So we are going just to make them to be in an array. Then we are going to call the other relationship too. Okay, so after that means that this member that will be returned here will be loaded with all the relationship that they have on the borrowings. Okay, so now let's finish up with the update method. So on the update method, we are going to call the store member request, and also we are going to add here the model binding. So member, then the member, and down here we are going to let's say let's create the member, and that member will be member, no, not that way. We just need to call here the update method, and then here we are going to get the validated data. So validated data like that way, and then we are going just to return a new object of member resource that way, and from there is when we are going to update the store request here, so that we can make this to be ignored for the changes that we did as we did for the book controller. So here we are going just to remove this and to make this to be separate items, and this should be inside an array like this way, and then we are going to call the rule, and then we are going to say unique, and then we are just going to copy what we did here. So it should be unique. Then you give the name of the table, the column, then you are going to ignore it by using the route. Okay, so here you are going to give the name of the table, which will be members. The column that you are going to check will be email. Okay, and then we are going to say ignore. Import this one first. Oh yeah, so this is the error. You don't have a comma here. And then on ignore, here you are supposed to provide the ID. So means here, if you remember what we did, you are supposed to provide the ID, but that ID is coming from the request. So what we are going to do is to reference the current route, okay, and then it will be member, and then we are going to access the ID. Okay, so this way. So that's how you are going to ignore the current member ID. So if that member already exists, then we are going to ignore the email. So we are not going to check it to be unique. So this is happening when you are doing update, but when you are creating, this has not any issue. Okay, so now that's fine. Now we can be able to close this one and go back to the member controller and finish up with the delete. So on delete here, we are going to have a single check. So this is the difference between the book and this member. So here we are going to check if the member has any active borrowings. So you cannot be able to delete the member that have any active borrowings. So they have to return all the books, and that's where you can be able to delete them. So here you're going to have an if condition, and then you are going to check for the member which is model binded here. So member, and then the member, and that's the one that we are going to use here. And then we are going to say if have any active borrowings and the account is greater than 0. Okay, means that we are going just to return a message which will be a response in JSON format, and we are going to return a message to tell the user that cannot delete member with active borrowings. Okay, and then here you can just put, let's say, that status code. Okay, and then if that's not the case, means that this is not true, means we can be able to delete that member. Okay, means that they don't have any active borrowing. Okay, and then after that we are going to return a response. So return a response, which we can say message, and you can just say, let's say, member deleted successful success. Okay, then you can just terminate that, and now we have all the functionality for our members. So from fetching all the members, storing the member, getting a specific member, updating, and destroying or delete. So now we can be able to test that in our Postman client. So now let's go back here So now I'll close all other tabs. So let me close all tabs, and then let me open again my workspace. Let me open the collections, and then from the collection I'm going to go direct on members, and I'll add the new request here. So I'll say get all members, and from it we are going to call the URL. Then we are going to change that, and we need to make sure that we have added that on our api.php file so that we can have that API route here. So we didn't add it, so we need to add it here, members. So we are going to have route and API resource, then we are going to call it members, and then member controller, that way. Okay, so now that's fine. Now we can be able to test that here. So on the header, as I did before, make sure that it accepts the application JSON. Okay, and then after that we can be able to fetch all members. So make sure that you pass this prefix of API, and then you can be able to fetch the members. So now let's try. And now you can see we get the response, but we don't have any member on our database. So now it's time for us to be able to create a new member. So now let's add the URL first, and then we are going to use the post method, and here we are going to add this one to accept application JSON. Okay, and then let's go back to the parameters, and here let's pass the parameters. So we need to have the name, email, phone. We have, let's check for other fields from here. So we have email, name, phone number, address. So we need to have the address. Okay, and membership date, without forgetting the status. Okay, so now let's try to see if the validation works. So now let's try to send that request. Okay, so here we are getting this error because we are trying to use the unique rule to get the ID and check if that is the current ID of the user. And this is used for when we are doing update, but when you are creating as we do now, it will give us this error. Then this will happen also when you are doing it on books. For example, if you are creating a book, because I remember we did the same thing on book, on the store book request here. So we did the same thing. So what is happening is that when you are creating data, means that this ID will always be empty. So when it will be empty, it will be giving you this error, as you can see. So it will tell you that you are trying to attempt ID on null. So to handle this situation, I will give you this simplest way to overcome this. So we are just going to create two separate request classes, the one for storing data and the other one for updating. And for the one for storing, we will just keep the previous logic, and for update means that is where we are going to apply this particular rule. Okay, so now let me create another request. So make a request. So I'll start with the one for member so that we can see how it works basically. And then here I'm going to call it update member request. So you can see we have created another update request. So this one, so I'll just check this one to be true, and after that is where I will copy the following code basically, and I'm going to paste it here. So on update, it will be this way. So let me import that rule. It will be this way, but when we are coming here on store is where we are going to return this to the first state. So what we are going to do is to make sure that this is not an array. It will be this way. Okay, so let's return it that way. Okay, now let's move it back here. Okay, that way. Okay, and then after that, what we will be checking here is to make sure that this email will be unique on members table, and then we are going to check for the email. Okay, so it will be this way. So this will not give us any error when we are storing that, but here we are going to ignore if the current member exists. So we are just not going to check if that email should be unique, so it will be ignored. So by using this, by creating this new request, means that we need to update here. So instead of using the store, we need to update, choose the update member request. So by doing this means that on the update, it will use the separate class, and in store, it will use the store member request. Here it is update member request. So by doing that means that this will not give us error. So now let's try and see. Yeah, so we can see now it is working as we expect. So now we can see we get the validations errors. So now means that we need also to perform this issue on the create book, because here also we will get the same issue. So what I'll do, I'll just create another request class, which I'll call it update book request, and another one for author. So this is the simplest way, but you can apply another way around of doing it. But for the sake of our video, I'll just do this way. So to separate it, to have two different request classes. So the one for storing and the one for updating. Okay, so now let's update the one for book. So here we are going to update this one. So let's make sure this is true. Okay, and then let's copy the validations from here, and then we are going to update this one. So the only thing that is changing is right here. So we are going to remove this one. So make sure that this is not an array. So it will be that way, and then we are going to make sure that this is unique on books table, and we are going to check for ISBN. Okay, so that way, and also for author, so make sure that the authorization is true, and then we are going to update by using this. Yeah, but on author, basically we don't need this request basically, because we don't have the unique value here, but you can use it if you want to do the separation as we did for other things. So for me, I'll just remove it because we don't want this update author request, so we can just remove this one. So I guess we created that for nothing, so I've just removed it. So now let's use the one for updating the book. So we are going to use it. Oh no, this one should be on. Sorry, this one should be on create, which is store book. So it should be here. So let me just paste it here, and this one should go on update. So update book, this one should come here. Okay, so I've just swapped that, and now we should be good. Let me import this, and now so on store we have that ISBN, and on update we have this one. So on update member we have this one, and on store member we have this one. So that's good. So now let's use the one for updating book. So let's update on the book controller. So on update here, instead of using store, so we're going to use the update book request, okay, which is this one. Okay, so now let's try to add a member again. So now let's try to create a member again. So since already the validation works well, so now let's try to add a member. So we are going to say, let's say member 1. Then we are going to say, let's say member 1 at example.com. Then let's say phone number, you can just leave it because that is not required. And then the address too is not required. But for membership date, we can just put, let's say 2025 or 3 or 2. The status, we can put this one to be active. Okay, and now let's send that request. Okay, so unknown column phone. Oh, so let's check for this one. Phone number, let's check it from here. We are trying to store a member. So this is a phone. Now let's check from the database, from the migration, I mean. Yeah, so we don't have the phone number. So let's move this one. I guess that is my error when I was pasting that code. So on store member, then update member. Let's remove that on update member here. Okay. So after that, now let's go back here. Basically, we need to make sure that on model we don't have that field 2. So here we don't have the phone number. Yeah. So now let's try again. And also let's remove it here. So I'm just going to delete, and it will remain like this way. So we have the name, email, address, membership date, and the status. So now let's try to send that request. And now you can see the member has been created successfully. So now if we try to get all the members, now you see we have this one member, and you can see the active borrowing count is 0, but you can see their status is active, and from there means that you can create more and more members. So for example, you can create member 2. So this can be member 2. Say member 2 at example. We can give here example address. Then you can make this one to be inactive, or let's say inactive. Okay. Like that way. Okay. Now let's try to send. Okay, so this should be inactive, not we don't have the underscore, so it should be that way. Let's try again. Yeah, so you can see now this works. So now if you go back here and you try to search to fetch all members, you can see now we have 2 members, and you can see the total number of members is 2. Okay, so now that's cool. Now let me close that one. Now the next thing, we are going to test the update functionality. So now let's create the update member. Okay, and the method for update, it should be patch, and here we need to have the fields. So we're going to have the name, email, address, membership date, and also status. Okay, so now let's try to add here the ID of the first member, and let's try to see if the validation works. So now let's try to send that request. Okay, now let's see. Yeah, basically because we on our headers we didn't accept the application JSON, so that's why you don't see anything. So now let's try again. We go back here and send that request again. So now you can see we have errors here. You can see the name field, email field, membership date, and status field are required. So all the validations are working well. So now let's try to update these fields. So for example, for member 1, let's update the name. Let's say we change that to use the capital letters. So member 1. And for email, let's say we don't want to update that, so we can just delete that. And let's say basically you can just leave that, because here we can just say, for example, it is member 1 at example.com. Okay, so for the address, the member 1 was not having the address, so now we can say address 1 example. Then in membership date, we can just, let's say, update this one 2023 or 1, let's say 5. Okay, so the status, we can just leave it to be active. So now let's try and send. You can see now the name has been updated. You can see the phone number is null, so we need to remove this one from the resource. So let's remove that, because we have just removed that. So also on a resource we have to remove it. So remove that from here. Okay, so now you can see this is how it looks like. If you try to send that again, you see the phone number will be removed, so it will be like this way. So the membership date, you can see it has been updated, the address, the email, name, and you have the ID. But I said before, you can just remove that or left it if you don't want to show it to your users. So you can just do that, and if you try to update, now you should not see that ID. Okay, so now the update method or functionality works well. So this API endpoint works fine. So now let's try to use the editing functionality. I mean the delete. So delete member. So now let's try to delete. But before you perform the delete action, you can try test the get specific member. So let's try to get a specific member. So create a new request and let's say get member. Okay, and here let's pass this, and here what we are going to do is to pass the ID of the member that you want to get. So let's say, for example, we want to get the member with the ID of 1. So remember to accept application JSON here. So send that request, and now you see we are getting the details of that specific member. So this is working fine. So let me just close that, and now let's try to delete the member. So what we are going to do is to add that URL or the API endpoint. Now accept the application JSON, and now let's add the ID of the member that we want to delete. So ID 1. Now let's try to send that request, and you can see here the member deleted with success. So now if we try again and get that member, we should not be able to see that member. So let's try to get that member here, send a request, and you see no query result for model this one was found. So that's how easy you can just do that. So I showed you how to give a very good error on this by using the book. So I showed you that you can update the way that you are returning that message. So for example, here on delete, you can just change that by using, let's say, by returning a response in this format. Okay. So if there is no way to, I mean, that was on author. No. You can just do the following. For example, I can just show you. If you want to make sure that when there is no any member to delete, you can just show a standard message instead of just showing this message that is coming from Laravel. So what you can do, you can just format that to your own way of returning it. So what you can do, instead of binding here the ID, you can just pass here the ID. Okay, and from there you can just have member, which you are getting from member model. Then you are going to find or fail, means that this will throw an error. So here you are just going to pass the ID, and after that you can add here the try and catch. So you're going to apply the try and catch, and after that, now let's copy all of this code, and we are going to paste inside the try block, and on catch we are going to catch an exception that will be thrown. So you can change that to A, and then from there this object is the one that we are going to use to get the message. So now let's copy that response, and here we are going to return a message, and on that message, let's say you can just say no data found, no data found. Okay, that way. Okay, and you can just give error or anything. You can give the status code or anything. So for now, means that when this will not find that error, this fail will throw an error which will be cached, and then after being cached by this catch, means that it will return this message instead of returning this long text to a user. So for example, now if we try to send again, okay, now if we try to send again, no, this should be delete. Okay, so make sure that the method is delete, and now let's try to delete, and now you can see no data found. So that's how easy you can just format your error messages. So this is how easy you can just do that. So you can update other controllers for, let's say, for book. You can just not use this if you want to give the standard error message. So you can do that. But there is other way around that I'll show you how to format these responses. So for example, the response on here or anything else. So I'll show you how to do that. Okay. Similar way on the show. This is where I showed you. So I was trying to explain something like this. So from here is what we did for the member too. Okay, like this way. So you're just using the ID, and then you get it from here by using the find or fail, which will throw an error. So that exception will be catched by this catch, and then from that catch is where you're going to format your response. Okay, but when you are doing debugging, here you can just return the message from this object. Okay, so now that's good. So now we have completed the members functionality. So now let's work on borrowings. So let's do that very quickly. So we are going to deal with borrowings here. Okay, so now let's go back to the code, and let me close all of these tabs. And now here we don't have the controller yet. So now let's create the controller for borrowings. So PHP @make controller. Then we are going to say borrowing controller. Okay, controller. Then you are going to give the flag to generate an API controller. Okay, after that means we are going to have this class that was created, which is a controller, and then it should have this default methods for CRUD operations of our API. So now let's update this index. So I'm just going to paste some of the code because we have did all of these things. So I'll just paste some of the codes here so that we can be a little bit quick, and I'll explain everything. So I'm going to import this borrowing model. Okay, and here I'll pass the request object. Okay, and I'll import this one, but we don't have this one resource, so let's create that resource first. So it should be make resource, and it should be borrowing resource. Also, we should create the one for request, so we should create the request here. So store borrowing request. Okay, and after that means that we can be able to import this one. Okay, and then here what I'm doing, I'm creating the query parameter, variable, and then I'm going to get all the borrowings with the book and the members. These are the relationship that we have on borrowing here. So we get the book that belongs to this borrowing, and also the member that has borrowed a specific book. Okay, and then after getting those relationships, then we are going to check if the user has filtered by status. So we are going to filter the data accordingly, and if the filter has contained member, means that they have filtered by using the member ID. Also, we are going to filter the data. But if that's not the case, means that we are going to generate a paginated list of all data, but we are getting the latest first. Okay, and here we are paginating by 15 data, but you can change that, let's say, to 10 or anything else that you want. Okay, so after that, then we are returning a collection of borrowings as we did for other controllers. So now let's update this one. So we need to make sure that it returns an array in a format that we want. So let me just paste the code there. So let me paste the code here. And here we are going to have the borrowed date, which will return a date. Then we are going to have the due date of that specific borrowing. Also the return date that we are expected to return the date, the book, the status. We are going to check if that book is overdue, because here on the model you can see we have that helper function which is called is overdue. Okay, and this will help us to check if the book is overdue or not. And then we are going to get the book that was borrowed. Then we are going to get the member that borrowed that book. And as I told you before, we are going to use the when loaded, means that it will be loaded conditionally. Okay, and we are going to get the details of the date that the book was borrowed, and then when you updated that value. Okay, so now means we are able to retrieve the borrowings. And now let's try to update this one. So here we just change the store actually borrowing request, and then let me paste the code there. So here I'll just paste the following code. So here we are going to import the book, and then what we are getting here, we are just going to call the find or fail, means that we are going to see if that book exists. Okay, so here we are going to check if the book is available. So if that book is available, means that is where you are going to create the borrowing. But if that book is not available, means you need to show that the book is not available for borrowing. Okay, so this is just a check. So that check will help you to help you to not give out the book or to borrow the book that is not existing in your library. Okay, so this is just a check, and then after that, if that is not the case, means that we are going to create that borrowing. And what we are going to do, we are going to get the validated data as we were doing before, which will be coming from this request. So here on this request is where we are going to pass the validation rules. So on validation rules, I'm going to paste the following data. Okay, so let me paste the following. Okay, so here we are going to check for the book ID, and to check if it exists in a books table, then we are going to check the ID of that is particular book, and then we are going to check for the member ID if we exist in this particular table. Also, we are going to check for borrowed date to make sure that it can be nullable and it should be a date, similar way to due date. Okay, after that, now let's go back here, and this should be able to store our borrowing. Okay, and after that, after being able to create that borrowing, then we are going to update the book availability, means that we are going to make sure that that book was borrowed. So here, this method we defined on the book, which will be able to decrease the number of available copies. So remember, this was the field that we are using to track the number of copies that are available and the one that are not available. So you are going to call that borrow, means that it will decrement the number of available copies. And when the user will return the book is where we are going to increment the number of copies. Okay, so after that means we can be able to store the borrowing. Now let's update the show method. So let's update the show method of our borrowing controller. So on show, we're just going to use the model binding functionality here. So let me just update this one to borrowing. So we are going to have the borrowing here. So it will be this way. And here, after getting the borrowing, means that we are going to load all the book and the member of that particular borrowing, and then we are going to return that borrowing from the resource. So remember, the resource, we have just updated it like this way. So it will return the details of the borrowing with the book and the member that borrowed the specific book. Okay, after that, on update, here we are going to show the following. Okay, so basically what I'll do here, instead of having the update, means that when the user has borrowed the book, when we are using the store, okay, what we are going to do next is to return the book. Okay, so to return a book means we are going to create a separate function. We are not going to use the update. Okay, so to do so, I'll just use the following method, which I'm going to show you. So I'll just delete the following method, and then I'm going to paste the following method. So this method, I've called it to be return book, and from this return book, I've passed I've just binded the model from the route, and then here I'm just checking the status of that particular borrowing. So if the status is not equals to borrowed, means we are going to return the message that the book has already been returned. So means that we are not the member does not have that particular book. But if that's not the case, means that this is false, means that we are going to update the borrowing record. So means that we are going to update that the book has been returned now. So we are updating the returned date, and also we are updating the status to be returned. After that, then we are going to update the book availability by calling the return book method. So which will call the following method on book. So we are going to call this one. So means it will be able to increment the number of available copies like this way. And then after that, we are going to call the borrowing. Then we are going to load the book and member relationships, and then after that we are going to return the return the book. Okay, and after that we are going to have another method which is called the overdue. Okay, so this will help us to get all the overdue borrowings. So on overdue here, we are going to get the overdue borrowings by fetching them from the borrowing method, model, and then from that we are going to get the relationship of book and member. After that, we are going to check for the status that is borrowed, and we are going to check if the due date is less than now. So if that the member was supposed to return the book yesterday, means that that date will be less than now. So when we are getting now, means that it will be the current time that you are today. So means that the moment that you are performing that functionality is where it will check that date. So if that date is below now, means that borrowing is overdue. Okay. After that means we are going to update the status to overdue. So instead of just being borrowed, we are going to change that to be overdue. Okay. So here is where we are doing the functionality. After that, then we are going to return the collection of overdue borrowings. So these are the methods that we are going to have here on borrowing. So now let's start by checking how to get the listing of all borrowings. So let's go to the client here, and I'll just remove other tabs. So close all tabs, and then here on borrowings, I'm going to create a new request, which I'll call it get all borrowings. And then from here, we are supposed to call the borrowings. And then from here, we are supposed to add that to our api.php. So api.php here. Okay, so here we are going to create a borrowing routes, basically. So what we are going to do is to call the API resource, and then we are going to call it to be borrowings. So borrowings, and then the name of the controller is borrowing controller, and it should be like this way. But remember, on our borrowing controller here, we have added two methods, and these methods are not the methods that are used for CRUD operations. So when you are using it here to create the resourceful controllers, it will not work as we expected, because it will expecting to have the delete and the update method. So to avoid those errors, we are going to use the only method, and from here is where we are going to return an array that will have the method that we have, that we need to call them when we are calling the when we are using that way to call all the method that belongs to the resourceful controller. So we have the index, we have the store, and the show. So we are not going to include the overdue and the return book. So what we are going to do is to return the index, store, and index, store, and show, I guess. Yeah, so the show, so, and show. Okay, and then after that we are going to define the return and overdue list. So we are going to define those routes in a separate way. So what we are going to do is to create a route, then we are going to say get, then we are going to get the borrowings overdue list. Okay, and then we are going to return a controller of borrowings. Okay, but here we are going to specify the name of the method that we are going to call from the method. from the controller actually. So we're going to call the method called the overdue. So make sure that you are calling the correct method, which is this one. Okay, so we are going to call it here, and here let me just terminate. But also we need to find a way to return the book. So to return a book, we are going to use this method. So this should be an action. So we are going to use the post method, and from that post method, we are going to use the following URL. So it should be borrowing. Let's say borrowings. Then we are going to pass the ID of the borrowing, but we are going to use the model binding. So that's why I'm using this borrowing. Then I'm going to say return. Okay. After that, we are going to return the controller. So it is borrowing controller. Then we are going to pass the name of the method, which is return book. Okay, after that, let's terminate that. Okay, so now we can be able to return a book, but also to see the overdue list. So now let's try to first do a borrowing. Okay, so by using the index method to see all the borrowings, then we are going to see how to store, and as we did before. So now for getting all the borrowings, we are going to use the get method, and we should accept the application JSON. Okay, and now let's try to send that request, and here you can see we don't have any borrowings data at the moment, and you can see the total number is 0. Okay, so now let's try to create a new request for creating a borrowing. So create borrowing. Okay, and here we are going to use that, and we are going to use the post method. Here we are going to have the fields that is required for creating a borrowing. Okay, so the fields that are required, basically we have the book ID. So we have the book ID, we have member ID, we have the borrowed date, and we have the due date, return the date. So this one you can just put it, but you can leave it to null, because that will be updated when you are returning the book. Okay, so for now let's try to see if the validations works as we expect. So now let's send, and nothing has been shown. So let's see, we need to have accept application JSON, and now let's try again, and now you can see the book ID and the member ID field are required. Okay, so here let's say we want to borrow the book with ID of number 5. The member ID should be 2, let's say. The borrowed date should be, let's say, 2025 of 8 31st. Then the due date should be, let's say, 2025 or 9, and then on 7, or let's say 7. Okay, and then in the status, this basically here on our controller, the status, it's not updated automatic, so we need to update it manually here and say borrowed. Okay, and the return date you can just leave it to null, because that is not required at the moment. So now let's try to store that data. So you can see here we have the data that was returned. So you can see the borrowed date, the due date, the return date. You can see it is null, the status is null. Oh, so why this is null? Status. So by default, the status, what it should be the status by default. Let's check from the borrowing. Borrowed. This should be by default actually. Okay, so now let's see from the resource. status. I'm wondering why it is returning null here, because I've just passed this borrowed. Let's check if that is corresponding to this one, borrowed. Let's see if I've messed up here. Okay. So basically, if you left this field, it will just populate that data automatic. Okay. So now let's change that, let's say, to book number 6, and let's try to update. To create, and then now the status is null. Let's check on the database. Okay, let's check here on borrowings. Let's see, and on status you see it is borrowed. So why it does not show me as we expected? So here we are returning the status, which is correct. Now let's check from the model. Borrowing status. Okay, borrowing, which will be coming from here. I guess that is caused by this store borrowing request here. We didn't add the status. Let's see. Let's add the status, because that will not be among the validated fields here. So that's why it is not shown, I guess. Let's try to see what will happen. But because on database it is already updated by adding the default value, means that we should be able to see this field. So let's see why this is not happening. But here you should be able to add that. So let's say this should be required, and you can just make sure that it is, we can just left it to be required, so that the user can should be able to add that field here. So if it will be empty, means that it will give you an error. Okay, so now let's see why we don't get that value when we are returning that value. So let's see if we try to get all the borrowings, and let's see if we get the status. Now we have, so the status is shown here, but when you are creating, the status is not being returned as we expect here. So let's see. Borrowing resource. Status. Okay, I guess this happens because we were not added this status here. So means that this object that was created here should only contain the fields that contained on your validated object. So that's why it was not shown. So now as we have added it here, means that it should be able to see that. So for example, let's try to create again the borrowing, and let's say borrows the book with ID of 9 and the same date. Let's send it again. So the status field will be required because we've added that to be required. And now let's try to send that request again, and now you can see the status is shown. Okay, so that's why we've just solved that problem here. So make sure that you add the fields that you want to be shown on your resource. So that's cool. Now on getting all the borrowings and also storing the borrowing is fine. And basically you should be able to see the number of copies for those books is reduced. Okay, so let's keep an eye on this one. So what we are going to do here is to check the books that are being borrowed. Okay, so here we are borrowing the book number 9. Okay, so now the book number 9, if we go back here, books, and get a book, so let's try to get a book with the ID of 9. So let's say books. Okay, and then we are going to get the book with ID of 9. Okay, now let's accept the application JSON. Now let's send. Okay, let me save that so that another time we should be able to get that. Okay, so here you can see the total number of copies is 30. Okay, the available copies is 24. Okay, so now let's keep an eye on this available copies. So now let's try to create a borrowing for another member. So I don't know another member that we have. Let's check from here firstly. So we just only have the member number 2. So let's create another member so that we can be able to check that. So let's create another member. So create a new member. So this should be members. Okay, and after that, let's try to use this one, for example. So this should be, let's add the member number 1 because we deleted the member number 1. So let's add that. So let's use the same request, send. No, we are not updating this one. We want to post, okay? And remove this one. Okay, so now we are good. Now send. Okay, so you can see the member 1 is added. So this should have the ID of 3, I guess. Yeah, see? So now let's try to create another borrowing. And here the member ID should be 3. And we are getting the book of ID number 9, which we have seen that the book has the availability of 24 copies. So let's see if that copy will be updated. So now let's create a borrowing. Okay, so we've added those fields as required. Now let's send. Now the book has been borrowed, and here you can see on book, you can see the number of copies is 23. And when you go back here and get the similar book, so let's send again, you see the number of copies was reduced. So it means that the functionality for borrowing the book by calling this method is working as we expected. So now that is fine. So now let's try to see a way to return a book. So let's say we want to return that book that the user has booked here. Okay, so what we are going to do is to create a new request here and call it return book. Okay, and here we are going to call the method that we have created here, the route actually. So to return a book, we are going to use this way. Okay, so let's copy that and paste it here. So it should be that way, and then here is where we are going to pass the ID of the book that we are going to return. So it's book with the ID of 9. Okay, that way, and then from here we are going to return that book. So remember what we did here. So we are going to check for the status, and then after that is where we are going to make sure the return date will be updated automatic, and then the book will be returned by incrementing the number of copies of available copies we actually. So now let's put this one to post because that was a post URL. So you can see this is a post URL. So now it will be this way. So now let's try to send that request. So make sure that we accept the application JSON like that way. And now let's try to send that request. No query result found for model this one. Okay, now let's see. This one should not be 9 because this was the ID of the book, but we are supposed to pass the ID of the borrowing that we want to return. So from here, let's go to the borrowings, and we want to return this book with the ID of 9 for the member of ID 3. So we want to return that. So we should be passing this ID. So it should be 4 instead of 9. So let me return pass the 4, and now let's send that request, and you can see the data has been updated. You can see the return date has been updated automatic, and you can see the status now is returned. So it's overdue. This is false, means that the book was not overdue, but you can see the number of copies has been updated back to 24. So means that the functionality for returning the book is working as we expected. So you can see that is the functionality. So if you get anything on here, make sure that your method looks like this. Okay. After that, we want to get the list of all overdue borrowings. So to do so, let's create a new request here. A list of overdues. Okay, and here we are going to get the URL from here. So it is called the borrowings overdue list. Okay, so let me paste it here, borrowings overdue list, and then accept the application JSON. Okay, after that, this should be a GET request, and then after that, let's send that request, and you can see there is no any overdue request. So to test that, for example, if we can try to refresh this, and I can update this, let's say due date. For example, let's change this one. Let's say let's return it back to, let's say, on the 1st of August, and then on the due date, let's make it to be it was supposed to be returned on, let's say, on, let's say 7. Okay, so means that today will be far away or far before this date. So means that that will be countable as the overdue. So now let's try to send again. Now we can see we have this borrow, means that this borrow it is overdue because the date, you can see the date of due date, it should be on 7th of August, but the user has not been able to return that book. Okay, so that's how easy you can just do that. So this is what the functionalities for all the library management. So now the next step will be to add authentication. So we want to be able to create the users. So to be able to say this user can access this and cannot access the following. But after that, I'll show you how to add the API versioning. So we are going to see on how you can add versions on your APIs. Okay, so before I show you how to add authentication into a Laravel API, there is one thing that I want to add on beside all the functionality that we have done before. So you may want, let's say you want to create a dashboard on that application that will be utilizing this API that we are creating. So for example, you may want to show some of the statistics to your application. So let's say you are creating a dashboard on your mobile application. So if you're creating that dashboard, so it may need some statistics that you want to show on that dashboard. So to do so means in our API, we should have a way to add the the statistics. So to do so, I'm going to show you that in a very quick way. So I'll just add a new route here, which are statistics. Okay. So here we are going to define a route which should be a get, and then we are going to call it statistics. Okay, and then I'm going to create a function. So this should be a callback function or a closure, and then after that I'm going to return response in JSON format, and here is where we are going to return the total number of books, the total number of authors, the total number of members. So you can make sure that this is imported correctly, and also the active borrowings. So we are going to check we are going to get the active borrowings, or we can just update that to be books then underscore borrowed, and from here I'm going to change that to be, so the condition here should be where status equals to borrowed. Okay, so borrowed. Okay, that way. And for the overviewed, we are also going to use the overdue. So we are going to check here for where status equals to overdue. Okay, that way. So this will be a simplest way you can show the statistics, but you can add more ways to get the statistics. Let's say you want to show that on a chart or in a table, so you should be able to do that from here. So you can just create a more complex functionality for your dashboard to look great, or a way to show the statistics of your APIs. So for now, I'll just do this simplest way of adding statistics. So now let's go and test this API endpoint and see what response it returns to us. So let's go directly to the Postman, and here I'll just create a new request, which I'll not put it inside any of these directories, so it will be a non-dependable request. So here I'll just call it statistics. So here let's call URL. So we are going to change here, and we are going to call the statistics endpoint. So make sure it's the same with here. So make sure this is the same that way. And now let's accept the application JSON. Okay, and after that, now we can be able to send that request. So try to send that. Yeah, so you can see we have the total number of books, the total number of authors, number of members. We can see the books that are borrowed and the overdue borrowings. Okay, so that's how easy you can just add the statistics. But as I've mentioned, you can add a more complex way of adding the statistics, so that you can be able to show them on your application that is utilizing these APIs. Okay, so now it's the time for us to start adding